Welcome to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and my co-host is Caitlin Drake. Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church.
Today, our guest is Boston Avenue's Minister of Welcoming and Evangelism, Reverend Jen Logsdon-Kellogg. So our topic today emerged out of a conversation that Reverend Jen and I had around some of our printed materials for welcoming and who we had in mind when we were creating these materials. And then we kind of went down a rabbit hole with our conversation, and ultimately we ended up discussing kind of competing paradigms between welcome and wanted when it comes to how churches engage with people. So first, what are some competing definitions or understanding of welcoming, especially when it exists in churches?
So most churches would say that all people are welcome, and I think that they mean it, that we, as the body of Christ, want to extend the grace and love of God to all people, and that we hope that people will come and find themselves received warmly, and that they would have some sort of introduction to someone in the congregation, that they'd be offered, a little bit of, as we were talking about with the material, something to orient them to the church and to what the church's priorities are, and that people would be made to feel, just like when you walk into somebody's house, that you would welcome them in and try to make sure that you can offer predict the things that would make someone feel like they are wanted to be there. But as I just said with those words, welcome and wanted, there's a big difference, especially when you're talking about a public space like a church where people are welcome and being actually wanted. And so my understanding of this comes really, I'll start with the Bible because that's where I like to start. There is a parable that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 14, and he's describing a banquet. And he says that the master has this banquet ready, and he sends out invitations. And the people who have been invited to the banquet, when the servants go and tell them the banquet's ready, they say, "Oh no, I've had something come up, I can't come." And then, so the master sends the servants out and says, "Go out into the city streets and find people and invite them to come to the banquet." And so the servants say, "Well, we've done that, but there are still some places open." And then the master says, "Go out to the alleys and to the byways and to the country roads and to the ditches and find the people and compel them, urge them to come and have a seat at the table." And so to me, the difference between welcoming is to throw open the doors and say, "Hey, we hope you can find your way in." And being wanted is for someone actually to come out looking for you and to say, "We really want you here."
Related with everything that is happening in the United Methodist denomination regarding LGBTQ plus inclusion, we see some churches that are against LGBTQ marriage or ministry proclaim in press releases that we welcome everybody. Do they mean what they say? What do they mean when they say welcome? Is this an outdated understanding of welcome?
I think that they are trying to reclaim the idea and the language that, and when I say churches who are, I wouldn't say against LGBTQ people, but that they would be against the marriage of same-gender couples and against the ordination of people who identify as gay or lesbian. And then, of course, there are all kinds of questions around gender identity, non-binary gender, things like that, that churches are wrestling with. And what they would say is that we do truly love all people and want all people to feel welcome. However, some churches who say that have pretty clear policies where they would say someone who is out as gay is welcome to attend, but is not welcome to be a part of leadership, or that someone who is transgender would be welcome to attend, but we're not going to acknowledge or ask how we can make sure that you have everything you need in order to fully participate. Things like that.
It seems almost like there's a tokenization that emerges when you talk about people being welcome, but if you're not thinking of them as being wanted, right? So we see that with LGBTQ persons. Oh, they're welcome to be here. Look, we have some LGBTQ people in our congregation. Or as a young person, you see this like, oh, we want millennials in the church, but we're not going to change anything or do anything different or engage with you in a different way or in a different manner. We just want you to be here and be like us.
Right. So that's where this language of welcome versus wanted, the particular words kind of came from a church that I'm familiar with, Quail Springs United Methodist Church, which is the church I served before I came here. They were going through the process of voting to become a reconciling congregation. And the senior minister there had a sermon series where he talked about the difference between being welcome versus wanted. And that's just it. And this would come down to all different kinds of how do we, as a church, not only welcome people that come in the door and expect them to act just like us, expect them to change the way they may behave or dress or speak, to be integrated or assimilated into the congregation, versus the idea where we celebrate diversity and we look for ways in which the people who come to us who do have a different background or a different experience in life are able to share their perspective because it is different and to be celebrated in their difference.
So I think that ties into a really common critique of churches, often made by millennials, but other groups as well. It's that they're inauthentic or they're hypocritical or they're negative. A study by the Barna Group found that among young people who don't go to church, 87% see Christians as judgmental and 85% see them as hypocritical. And I feel like that is reflected in how churches approach the concept of welcome, that we welcome you here, we want you here, but we don't want you to be any different. We don't want to change. So do you see that kind of larger trend of maybe leaving church or rejecting church or finding that it's not a space reflected in this welcome wanted and in welcoming ministry?
I do. And I want to bring in some language that I heard from Brene Brown. So if you're not familiar with Brene Brown, you should look up some of her books. But she uses a description of the difference between fitting in and belonging. And so if you are fitting in is changing your own behavior and accommodating so that you fit in with the established culture. But belonging is, it's different. It's knowing that you don't have to change who you are in order to be a part of the group. Not that there can't be distinctions and differences within the group. And she talks about how she tells this story, which I just thought was really profound, talking to a group of elementary age children. And one of the children said something along the lines of, it's really hard to feel like you don't belong in any kind of group, but when you don't feel like you belong in your own family, that's the worst. Well, if we think of church as the place where we can bring our full, authentic selves and be vulnerable enough to open ourselves up for transformation, which is the language that Christians use, is that we are seeking to be transformed by God's grace and God's love in order to become more like Jesus Christ. If church is the place where you can't come with that level of vulnerability and authenticity, then what are we doing, right? Then it's really more of a social club than a church. Unfortunately, one of the things that has happened is that those who find church a place where it is easy to be authentic and that find it the way we have structured church to be, fulfilling for them, we have established it so that those who find fulfillment in that kind of an environment are the ones that come and stay and continue to shape the environment. And so if we're not open to new and different ideas and new ways of doing things, then it's a really great setup for one particular kind of person, but not for others.
I think about specifically the welcoming committee or the welcoming and greeting committee and how they frame and shape welcome and wonder if there's an ability to dig deeper into those systems or into that process and that idea to make that welcoming committee deeper than a greeting committee.
Right. So, and that's one of the challenges that I have in thinking about the ministry that is under my realm of responsibility, is that we have a pretty decent grasp on how to make somebody feel welcome when they find their ways into the doors, and especially if they can find their way to the parlor, which is where the coffee and donuts are. But how do we as a welcoming committee do what, in this parable that I shared, do what the servants are sent to do, which is to actually go find the people who would never even think that they would be welcome in a place like this, or that they wouldn't presume to assume that they would be invited to the banquet. And how do we, first of all, make space at the table and make sure that a place is prepared that will be warm and hospitable, and then also extend the invitation in such a way that people know that they are not only welcome to come in, but that they are wanted, and they don't have to change who they are in order to come and sit at the table and share in the banquet.
And I think you made a really good point. This wasn't a knock on our welcoming committee or a greeting committee, that you do have to prepare the table. You do, coffee and donuts have a really important place in church. I was talking with Alicia about this when her family was looking at moving over here because she was accepting a position, and her son asked, but do they have donuts? Right? It is part of what people experience. That preparing the table is important. And having a smile and a handshake and a person who looks genuinely happy that you're there is important. So certainly not to dismiss that piece, but also to add in that second piece is a paradigm shift.
Right. And so for that second piece, I would say, when, especially in the conversation about our queer beloved community, when we invite someone to our church who is gender nonconforming, are they going to find a bathroom that is not designated for a specific gender? How difficult is it to find that bathroom? Do we have the practice? I was in the senior high youth Sunday school class on Sunday, and we introduced ourselves using our pronouns, which is a very important practice when you want to be a hospitable place for people who do not use traditional or the she, her, hers, or he, him, his pronouns, or that they don't, it's not clearly identifiable which gender they identify with. So those are practices of preparing the table that need to be done and talked about before often we invite someone in, so that we don't want them to have a negative experience.
You've already talked a little bit about how we can be want people and be wanting as opposed to welcoming. Can you maybe talk more about what does wanting people in a church look like as opposed to just welcoming?
So one of the things that we might look at is, what do we need to unlearn about the way we already do things, questioning our assumptions. So one of the things that Caitlin and I had talked about was make the assumptions that we make about what people think of when they think of church, or the things that we think are true of every church, which may not necessarily be true, and also that not everybody has had experience with any kind of church. Sunday school being one of those examples. Also the way we structure our committees, the way that we have a tendency to reelect people to the same committee. And yes, we need the expertise and the history, the institutional history that comes with people who have served for years, but we also need fresh perspectives and just the sheer amount of time and energy that people have to commit to committee work versus other kinds of ministry. Other things might be changing our programs to really focus on those who are not already here as opposed to those who are already here, or at least being intentional about giving resources to starting new ministries that would be focused on those who are not already here. One example would be pub theology, which doesn't even happen in the church building, which is something that's hard for a lot of our, older members or more long-term members to wrap their heads around. Why would we not want to do ministry in the church building when we have this wonderful facility to use? Well, there are people who would really not at all be interested in walking into a church until they have developed some relationships with us out in the community. So how do we show up in the community? Do we show up for the Martin Luther King Jr. Parade? Do we show up for the Pride Parade? How do we use our social media platforms to advocate for social justice or for policies in our state government that would help those who are disaffected in some way? Those are some of the things that not just the welcoming committees, but the entire church could look at doing. In terms of welcoming committee itself, I am trying to recruit leaders who are new to the church because they give us a fresh perspective on what it was that made them feel wanted when they got here. And we can build on the things that we are doing well.
So kind of related to that, I've been doing some interviews with new members for a video project that I'm working on. And one of the themes has been how wonderful you have been specifically in sitting down with them, answering their questions about the church, and helping them find their place in the church to serve or connect or join. Because in a church this size, with this sheer number of ministries that we have, it can be overwhelming as somebody new to find the space that really fits with your gifts and your interests and your passions and how you relate to God. So we're obviously extremely fortunate to have you doing that. But is that something that only a pastor or only a pastor with your title should be doing? Or should the broader church community be doing similar things? And if they should, what does that look like? How does, Philip do that, or somebody who isn't on staff at all do that? Or me as well. Not to throw Philip under the bus, or maybe to throw Philip under the bus. Just
Go
a
for
little
it.
small bus.
Of course, you know that my answer is going to be no, it doesn't just have to be a pastor that does this. And in fact, it is the job of the whole church. And so I think there are a lot of different ways we can be going about doing that. One of those is to be on the lookout for your mini-me. So I taught one of our older and more experienced Sunday school classes recently, and I reminded them of a principle that was taught to me that I think is true in all kinds of situations. It is the responsibility of the elders to create and maintain connections with the younger generation. And the problem with that is that we all hate rejection and we fight hard against feeling rejected. And once you've been, if you reach out to somebody 2 or 3 times and they don't respond, then it's easy just to brush it off. But for the elders in the church, and by elders I mean those who are already established members, every single elder in the church should be looking for their mini-me, for someone that they can mentor and make sure that that person is connected and help them to navigate the ministries of our church and get them plugged in, and also to be open to learning new things from them. So it's a mutual relationship. We've got one particular thing that's getting ready to happen that I'm pretty excited about. We have one of our older members and a youth who are working together to lead a class on discernment. And they have intentionally created intergenerational space for mutual benefit, and so that everyone who comes might be transformed by the love of God. And while that may sound simple, I think it is exactly the kind of thing that we need to lift up and celebrate and continue to do.
Why does wanted matter in terms of bringing people into a church? Does wanted matter in keeping people at a church?
People have pretty good spidey senses. And so if somebody has the perception that they are only wanted because, as Caitlin mentioned earlier, they're a token representative of a certain group, a certain age group, or a certain, LGBT or some kind of cultural diverse group, or if they're only wanted, as they may perceive it, for their numbers or for the dollars that they are able to put into the offering plate, people can tell that. And so I think it's really important that we, for our identity as a church, really see ourselves as, and do the work to make sure that we continue to center ourselves around the love of God as demonstrated in the work of Jesus Christ, and that we see ourselves as the incarnation of Christ for our little corner of the world, and that everybody is wanted because that's the way Christ treated people.
How do we help shift a church culture away from welcomed and into wanted?
I think that it is really important that as a church, we see ourselves as the body of Christ, and that every member of the body of Christ is essential. Not everybody will be a part of this particular church, but that through the work of all churches working together as the body of Christ in the world, there is a place for everybody in some faith community. And I want to honor that not everybody's Christian, and I think that you can be, I'm not trying to be exclusivist here, so please hear that. I honor people who practice other faiths, and I think that ultimately God's going to do something in which we all find unity. But for those who are Christians, I think that there is a place for each and every person in some Christian church, and that we, as long as we are earnestly seeking to help everybody find their place in the body of Christ, help them to become be more and more transformed into the person that God created them to be, that we don't have to worry so much then about welcome versus wanted if we are trying to live into that image of the body of Christ, and making sure that every person that crosses our paths is in a place where they can grow.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so one thing I want to add is that something church members can do, something that I try to do, but church members can do to help people feel that they are really wanted, is to extend personal invitations, especially when there is an event that is specifically designed for a particular group or with that group in mind. To say, hey, all are welcome, that's great and fine, but to extend a personal invitation to somebody. Pub theology is a good example. If you've got somebody that you don't think they'd be real comfortable coming in on a Sunday morning, but they would be comfortable going in and having a conversation about faith and life with us at a pub, that you not only say, hey, you should come, but that you extend a specific personal invitation, maybe even, hey, ride with me, I'll buy you a beer, so that people know that that invitation is specifically for them. And one more thing I'd like to add is that I'm not, when I come up with new things that I want people, that I ask people in the church to do, I'm not knocking the things that have been done. I think we have a rich tradition here of a faith community that is vibrant. It has been growing, has been active in this community for a long time. And the things that they have already done are good and worthy, and they need to keep doing them. I'm just looking at some new things that we might want to add to our repertoire, and maybe look at some things that we need to prune. I try not to come off as shaming, but because I'm coming in with new eyes, I end up pointing out all the things that we could be doing and not necessarily celebrating the things that we are already doing. And I want to make sure that I say that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. We are located at 1301 South Boston Avenue in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.